August 6, 1990, exactly 4 days after Iraqi tanks rolled across the border to annex the sovereign nation of Kuwait, the international community gathered in New York with a profound sense of urgency. Inside the United Nations Security Council, the atmosphere was charged with historical gravity. Recognizing that a dangerous precedent was being set, the Council voted overwhelmingly to pass Resolution 661. This historic resolution imposed comprehensive economic sanctions and a near-total global trade embargo on Iraq, blocking all imports and exports with the single exception of strictly monitored humanitarian medical supplies. It was a landmark, textbook application of international law. For the first time since the inception of the UN, the paralysis of the Cold War veto was gone. The United States and the Soviet Union stood side by side against a common aggressor. This decisive move marked the official beginning of a massive, unprecedented diplomatic and economic campaign designed to completely isolate the regime of Saddam Hussein. The message from the global body was loud and clear. The raw territorial conquest of a smaller neighbor would not be tolerated in the modern international order.
Why the United Nations took this specific route, we must analyze the strategic efficacy and underlying philosophy of economic sanctions. In August 1990, the world was eager to prove that international law could solve global crises without immediately resorting to devastating military bloodshed. Economic pressure was favored first because it offered a non-violent method to cripple Iraq's war machine from within. Since Iraq's economy was heavily dependent on a single resource, oil, the logic seemed ironclad. By blocking Iraqi oil exports, the UN aimed to dry up Baghdad's revenue streams, making it financially impossible for Saddam Hussein to pay his vast army or maintain his occupation of Kuwait. However, implementing a global embargo of this magnitude presented immense logistical complexities and diplomatic hurdles. It required absolute global compliance. If even a handful of nations chose to secretly buy Iraqi oil or smuggle weapons across Iraq's porous desert borders with Jordan or Turkey, the embargo would fail. Naval forces from a coalition of nations had to be rapidly deployed to enforce a maritime blockade in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, intercepting and searching commercial cargo vessels. The UN had to build a complex bureaucratic framework to monitor global shipping, testing whether international diplomacy possessed the actual teeth and institutional willpower to choke an aggressive state into submission.
Economic sanctions, however, are a blunt instrument, and they are never without deep, unintended consequences. As weeks turned into months, Resolution 661 created a dual impact that triggered intense global debate. Politically, the embargo did succeed in freezing billions of dollars of Iraqi assets abroad and stalling the nation's industrial capability. Yet it failed to shake Saddam Hussein's political grip on power or force his troops out of Kuwait. Instead, the heaviest burden of this economic isolation fell directly upon the Iraqi civilian population. The sudden halt of international trade caused the value of the Iraqi dinar to collapse, triggering hyperinflation. Basic food prices skyrocketed, and severe shortages of clean water purifiers, infant formula, and essential hospital equipment began to emerge. This reality sparked fierce ethical debates worldwide about the morality of using economic starvation as a tool of geopolitical policy. Critics argued that the sanctions were punishing innocent civilians, while the ruling elite remained insulated from the hardship. As Baghdad dug in its heels, using the suffering of its people as a propaganda tool, the international community began to realize that economic pressure alone would not break the deadlock. The slow, painful trajectory of the embargo was rapidly moving toward an inevitable, devastating military intervention.
Decades later, UN Resolution 661 remains one of the most defining and heavily scrutinized case studies in the power, potential, and inherent limitations of the United Nations. The 1990 embargo on Iraq was unique because it was the most comprehensive and rigidly enforced sanctions regime ever attempted in human history. By demonstrating that the UN Security Council could successfully unite the globe to economically blockade an aggressor state, Resolution 661 set the definitive tone for international intervention in the post-Cold War era. It transformed economic sanctions into the go-to weapon for international diplomacy over the next 30 years. From the Balkans and Haiti to modern-day measures against nuclear proliferation in Iran and North Korea, the template established on August 6, 1990 has been copied repeatedly.
Yet the legacy remains deeply complicated. It forced the UN to reevaluate how sanctions are structured, leading to the development of smart sanctions, targeted measures aimed specifically at freezing the assets of political leaders and military elites rather than inflicting sweeping, catastrophic economic harm on an entire civilian population.
The UN response on August 6, 1990 was an undeniable turning point in the history of international relations and global governance. It proved that the world could stand united against military aggression, but it also exposed the profound human costs and systemic limitations of trying to force a dictatorship to yield through economic isolation alone. As we look back at this critical chapter of the Gulf War crisis, we are left with questions that continue to challenge our global order today. How do you assess the ultimate effectiveness of comprehensive economic sanctions in achieving diplomatic goals? Are they a humane and necessary alternative to war, or do they simply act as a slow-motion blockade that harms the vulnerable while failing to stop determined autocrats? We want to hear your analytical insights, historical perspectives, and thoughts on this complex topic. Please join the conversation and share your viewpoint in the comments section below. If you found this detailed breakdown of Cold War-era diplomacy and international law valuable, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with others who love history, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll join our community for regular deep dives into the grand strategies, hidden political maneuvering, and monumental events that have shaped the global landscape. Thank you so much for watching. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you in the next chapter of history.